Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Operating in the Spirit of Kingdom Excellence podcast. I'm your host, Tawanda Coles, and I'm thrilled to have you joining me today. Well, brothers and sisters, we've crossed into a new year, thank the Lord, and I pray you are well, you are in good health physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, and you are ready to experience all that God has for you in this new year. For today's episode, I'm honored to be joined by my brother and co-laborer in the gospel, Elder Jason Woods Sr. He serves as the assistant pastor of High Calling Ministries in Upper Marlboro, Maryland, and over the holidays, I had an opportunity to sit down for a conversation about why honor matters in the local church. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation and pray that you'd invest the time to listen to this episode in its entirety as Pastor Jason and I share our perspective on the topic of honor in the local church. Let's get into today's episode. Welcome, Pastor Jason. God bless you. Thank you for being here today.
Welcome. Thank you, my sister. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so thrilled to
Yes.
finally be here.
Yes,
Yes.
absolutely. So this season of the podcast, we're focusing on understanding what kingdom excellence means. At its core, it's the heart to serve.
Yes.
And not just serving God, but having the heart to serve God's people.
Yes.
And to those who are listening, to learn more about that definition, I'd encourage you to check out episode 1, where we define what kingdom excellence is in more detail. So definitely be sure to take a listen to that episode. So I want to get into today's conversation. And Pastor Jason, I'll start by asking you to share with our listeners your perspective of what kingdom excellence means to you.
Wow, good morning. What a great question. Elder, you are, first I have to say, I am thrilled to see God in action in your life doing what it is you've been called to do. And so let me stay obedient and get to the answer the question, but I'm just so excited to see God moving in your life. When I think about kingdom excellence, I think about a posture of respect toward God that says, I value what it is you have entrusted me with, the small piece of ministry that God has given us. It's a serious thing to look at this as it belongs to God, which it does.
Yes.
And so everything that we do and say and all of our deeds and actions need to represent God in a fashion that says, I value what you've given me. I know I don't deserve to be here. So let me cross as many T's as I can, dot all the I's that I can. And at the bottom of it all, let my heart be in a posture that says, I am representing God,
Yes.
in his kingdom.
Yes.
And so everything that I do needs to be not only above board, but it should be attractive. And it should be done in a manner that says, I'm a small part of a larger unit that all works together to glorify God. And so whether I'm speaking, singing, whatever I'm doing in the kingdom should be done in a manner that projects strength, beauty, vitality, competence, all of those attributes should be at display when we're serving God.
Yeah, no, that's good, Pastor Jason. I think that when we, one of the words that keeps ringing in my spirit is having this posture of humility.
Yes.
And that it's not about us.
No question.
And it's how we are to understand the importance of extending ourselves. We are an extension. I believe all of us are an extension of the Lord Jesus Christ. Absolutely. In our homes, in our communities, in wherever we get the opportunity to serve. So it is extremely important that our posture is always one of thinking of how can I be more like Jesus,
Absolutely.
right? How can I be more like Jesus? And I think that as we look at the landscape of where we are today, I want to say to our audience, Pastor Jason and I converse weekly, right?
Yes.
And about a month ago, we had a conversation about how we came into our roles
Yes.
in our mid 20s, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And we share similar experiences in terms of how we've navigated our way through our leadership experience. But
That's right.
one thing that did not change that I want to kind of talk about today is how we honored our leaders.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
How we honored our leaders. And I want to spend a few minutes, Pastor Jason, part right here to share with our listening audience
Hmm.
some of our leadership lessons in terms of
Hmm.
why how you honor your leader in the
Hmm.
local church
Hmm.
matters. So
Hmm.
I'll pause right here to say this to our senior pastors or the senior church leaders listening. This is the episode you want to share with those young people that you're developing and integrating into your leadership teams, into those emerging leaders. Emerging leaders,
Hmm.
I'm defining as those who are in their early 20s, starting out. When we were in our 20s, Pastor Jason, there was no
Hmm.
term for it, right?
No, no,
No term
no,
for it.
no. That's
But
right.
today, the term is emerging leaders, those in
That's
their
right.
early 20s, starting out in their leadership roles.
Hmm.
I want to encourage you all to kind of lean in and listen to this conversation.
Yes.
Before we hit record, Pastor Jason and I were talking about how we are a part of this hybrid
Hmm.
generation, if you
Hmm.
will, where
Hmm.
we grew up in the 20th century church,
Hmm. That's right.
and where a lot of what we see in terms of leadership was simply not tolerated,
No,
right?
not at all.
Not at all, right? And where we saw that, we experienced it, but we also are now a part of this current landscape of the
Yes.
local church
Hmm.
where so much is changing, even literally as we speak. And
Yes.
we see the standard of leadership or what's tolerated and
Hmm.
accepted on a slippery slope. So let's park right here, Pastor Jay. Let's get into
Yes.
it. This is going to be
Let's
kind
get
of
into
like
it.
an unfiltered conversation right
Hmm.
here. So
Hmm.
so lean in, brothers and sisters, and we're going to share our thoughts. I want to kind of like, kick it off with your thoughts, kind of like where we are in terms of your observations
Hmm.
in terms of those coming into leadership. What are some of the things that you've observed that we've got to tighten up in?
Oh wow, what a huge, huge question. But like you said, we've kind of been in this vein for a while. So I'll start with this, my sister. We are at a, I believe we're at a junction where we have more information than we've ever had before
Mhm,
in the
mhm.
history of mankind. We have
So true.
access to more information instantly than we've ever had. And our leaders, our emerging leaders, are definitely educated.
Yes.
We've got the degrees. We've been able to be blessed by the hard work of the generations before us, who labored and sacrificed so we could get into institutions of higher learning.
Mhm,
We've taken advantage of that. We've gotten our MAs, we've gotten out all of our degrees and
mhm.
all of that. Um, but yet we still lack understanding,
Yeah,
and we
yeah.
still lack wisdom.
Mm.
And in some places, we even lack knowledge, even though we're educated. What
Wait a
I,
minute, hold up. Wait,
mhm,
we're not gonna go past that one too fast. We
okay,
lack knowledge,
hmm,
even though in some instances we may be educated.
yes,
Y'all,
yes,
come on, let's noodle on that one. Think that over. That is a Selah moment because to your point, we have
hmm,
so much information coming at us, but if we don't take the opportunity
hmm,
to really get the knowledge
yeah,
in terms of what it is the Lord would have us, that information that we may get from all these other myriad of sources, and even seminary training and all that kind of stuff. I'm not knocking that because I
hmm,
believe that there's a place for it, but there is certain knowledge that is downloaded into our spirit
yes,
by the Holy Spirit when
yes,
we learn to sit and lay prostrate before the Lord. That is some things that we cannot overlook
yeah,
over, that knowledge, that information, I'm sorry, that's acquired through
yes,
all of your education has its place. But my God, when it comes to serving in the Lord's church, it
yes,
is laying before the Lord in
yes,
prayer, in his word, engaging in our spiritual disciplines consistently. That cannot be something that is put on the back burner.
No, you can't overlook that. Proverbs chapter number 24, verse 3 says that a house is built through wisdom,
Mm-hmm.
but by understanding it is established.
Mm-hmm.
And I think
Mm-hmm.
the problem or the challenge with the house of our current and emerging leaders in some respect today is the fact that we've done very well with the book knowledge, yet we haven't we haven't quite crossed that threshold of actual spiritual transfer.
Oh, yes, 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 yes.
And part of the reason for that, I believe, is that it's a generational disrespect. Is that
Mm-hmm.
there's an older generation that has the wisdom because of their experience, and they don't quite have the book knowledge or education. And then the counterpart has the book education, but not the experience nor the wisdom.
Yeah, yeah.
And so when they're going through their experiences, they're creating this new experience because of the lack of wisdom. And their experience is not the same because they haven't done the due diligence of crossing that bridge and understanding that, yes, I have book knowledge, I know all of scripture, yet it's almost like that story we hear about the Psalms, the one who talks about the Psalms and can recite the 23rd Psalms,
Sure.
but but the other person is in touch with the shepherd that they're talking about in the psalm,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And so
Mm-hmm.
we've got the book knowledge against the wisdom and experience, and those two groups have to come together. I think
Yeah.
the challenge is, how can the emerging leader come to understand and respect the wisdom of the elders without the elders thinking that they don't need the youth vitality and education of the younger? And we have to bring those together.
Oh, so Pastor Jay, so we've kind of played in this sandbox, right?
Yes,
You
no
know, we've
question.
been there, we've been there, we've experienced that
No
and
question.
understanding that, there is this desire for I believe there is a desire for that wisdom, right?
Yes,
And
yes,
there has to be on the part of our seasoned elders,
yes.
not to view the emerging leaders as those who are trying to because it's not always necessarily that they're trying to change things,
No, right.
but the perspective is just different,
Different.
right?
Hmm.
And we have to guard ourselves against thinking that different is wrong.
Right. Correct.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And we have to be okay with understanding that, we're always in a season of transition.
Yes.
Always. And I
Always.
think as the local church continues to grow and thrive, we've got to make sure that synergy between the seasoned elders and the emerging leaders doesn't get lost in terms of viewing the emerging leader as someone who is trying to be contrary
Exactly.
or someone trying to just abolish, all
Hmm.
the foundational principles. I don't
Right.
even think that's
That's
it.
not the
As a
aim.
matter of fact, I know it's not it.
Yeah.
It's really about can we maybe look at things through a different lens
Sure.
as it relates to our experiences as a young person,
Sure.
how we are in the marketplace or how we're engaging with our friends and our family? Can we look at things through a different perspective? We're not saying that you should um, compromise the
Sure. No,
non-negotiables,
not at all.
right?
Not at
But
all.
there could be a different method, and I pray that as our listeners are kind of digesting this and feeling some level of tension, feel it, lean
Sure.
into it.
Yes.
We really want to make sure that there is space for both. The wisdom of
Hmm.
the senior leaders, and there's also space for the creativity and the innovation
Yes, absolutely.
that our emerging leaders bring to the
Yes,
table.
we have to have it. We live in a technologically advanced era.
Hmm.
You cannot do ministry today without it.
Yep.
You cannot be effective in ministry today without it. In as much as you kick against the brick, you won't make any headway without it. um Exodus chapter number 20 says it admonishes us to revere, respect, and treat with deference, submission,
Mhm.
and perform your duties as you honor your father and your mother. right? And so I think that kind of speaks to, even in the church, our spiritual mothers and fathers have a wisdom that a younger generation must first and foremost respect and honor,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
You have to do due diligence in making sure that you honor and respect those who came before you, because without their sacrifice, there would be no ministry for you to serve in today.
Listen. Listen.
Right. So the opportunity that God has opened up for our generation, and like you eloquently said before, you and I fall in this middle space. But that generation coming right behind us,
Mhm.
they
Mhm.
have to recognize that there are certain battles you're not going to win with your education.
Listen. Come on.
You're only going to win certain battles, as the scripture says. It's going to take, you're fighting spiritual warfare and you're trying to use natural means.
Mhm.
You're never going to win that fight. So you have to humble yourself, and you have to make sure that you recognize spiritual principles that apply to spiritual warfare, so that you can win the battles God has placed us in place to win.
Mhm.
And you're never going to get there with you pulling out your degrees, when what you really need to do is humble yourself and pray.
Yeah. Yeah.
Those two things have to come into alignment with each other. And I think, by and large, the older generation has gotten kind of scared, for lack of a better word, because they
Sure.
feel like coming for their position.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
You know
Yeah.
what I
Yeah.
mean?
Mhm. Mhm.
What relevance will I have if I can't do this anymore in the in
Mhm.
the in the church, or if I'm not esteemed, or if I'm not looked to for certain things? And I think that is the issue with making what you do in the house of God your total identity.
Mm.
Right. And I
Mhm.
think that's a piece that the older generation has stuck within them, because the church was really all they had.
Sure. Sure.
It's where they were morally, where their esteem was built up in the church. They found out who they were in the church, but they were attached to the church so deeply that when I can't fulfill my duty in the church anymore, I'm discarded.
And not only that, so Pastor Jason, to piggyback on that, I think we grew up in a time where, to your point, that was all they had. It was in the church where they were most respected,
Yes.
right? Because
Yes.
most of the time, whether in the home or in the marketplace, it
Sure.
just wasn't there. You know
Sure.
what I'm saying? Not
Sure.
having any influence in terms of decision making or some kind of um um position of authority, if you
Absolutely.
will. And
Absolutely.
so when the danger there in terms of making what you do in the local church your identity, you do feel kind of like, oh my gosh, threatened.
Yeah.
Like, what happens if I'm no
Right.
longer doing this? And I
Right.
think there's an opportunity, probably for a future podcast episode, to really talk about and expound on the difference between understanding your role
Yeah.
in the local church
Yeah.
and what it is you're called to do,
Absolutely.
and that your identity should not be tied into a specific role,
Right.
right? And
Amen.
I think one of the things that our emerging leaders are super clear on is that point.
Yes.
They don't find their identity in a role that they have in the local church. And
Correct.
sometimes that can be misconstrued as not really caring,
Right.
you know, and it's not
Devalue.
even
Yeah.
that. You
Yeah.
know, it's more so I understand and I'm clear about what my calling is, and that I can serve in multiple roles. I'm not tied or married
Exactly.
to any role in particular. It doesn't make me who I am.
Exactly.
Right? Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
Yep.
I think that
Very good point.
we there's a lot of there's a lot of things to be learned on both ends,
Yes. No question.
with regards to that. And you said something I had in my mind for this conversation, three key areas for us to talk about, and you've already touched on them. One being submission,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Understanding how to come under the authority of another,
Yes.
right?
Oh
And
my
how
goodness.
that is important for emerging leaders to understand. And you talked about, our um the older generation, our senior leaders, the mothers of the church,
Yes.
like, where
Yes.
are the mothers of the church? Come
Yes.
on, that's a
Yeah.
question.
Yeah. The mothers of the church are now 40.
Right. Come on. And,
I'm
right.
keep it in 100.
Yes.
They 40, right? They 35 and 40. And that 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 whole element of wisdom that Big Mama and then Mama had,
Mm-hmm.
that passing on of wisdom, knowledge, and understanding from generation to generation is now something. There's a huge gap in between. Big Mama just left. Big Mama is sitting at home, watching hip hop, love and hip hop.
Come on, Pastor Jason.
And then the mothers of the church are 40, right? So they just left the club last night. You know what I
Come
mean?
on, Pastor Jason.
So the spiritual maturity process has to happen now a lot quicker.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
So some of the things we used to get, and you know how we came up, since we had Sunday school.
Mm-hmm.
We stayed in church all day.
All day.
Sunday was off limits, yo.
All.
Sunday was, don't make no plans on Sunday.
None.
If it don't involve being in the house of God, don't make no plans. So Sunday we had 6 days a week.
Yeah, yeah.
That Sunday was in all sense of the word holy. Like you
It
wasn't
was,
doing nothing
yes.
on
You
Sunday.
were not doing anything.
Right.
Absolutely. A funny story. I had a situation with my husband and I were recently talking about this very topic and how
Mm-hmm.
our children, who are under the age of 12, two of them, we were invited to an evening service.
Mm-hmm.
My children said, "What's that?"
What is that? Mom, what is that?
What is that? Do you
Yeah.
mean to tell me we have to do church again? We
Again?
going we going again?
Yeah.
And I recalled I shared with them, I said, mommy was in church from 9 o'clock all the way until maybe 9 p.m.
Yeah. Sun was down.
The sun was down.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think, to our point here, we talked about how that spiritual maturity and what was given to us. And I don't want our listeners to think that there was anything wrong with that, because at that time in that space
Yeah.
for us,
That was
that's what we
common.
needed. That was common.
Yeah.
That was common.
Most
And
churches did
and
that.
most churches did it, and especially those in the Black culture,
Yeah.
the Black church, that was common. And in some ways, emerging leaders are like, "Nah, I ain't got time for that.
Nah, Slim. You
I don't,
you
have
got
time
about
for
an
that."
hour you got about an hour.
About an hour, about 90
Yeah,
minutes or
you got about
so.
90 minutes of my time, and then you
Hmm.
probably got about an hour to 45 minutes of my intellectual concentration, right? Where
Sure.
I'm actually hearing what you're talking about.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so I think that change in culture, technology, have all happened in that whirlwind, and here we are today with emerging leaders coming to, because see, what the thing is, what you just described, when you were in Edmondson Avenue in Baltimore all day
Yep.
long on Sunday, and I was at
Hmm.
Georgia Avenue all day long on Sunday, what we understood was, not only was God important, our connection to the community of believers was important,
Listen. Oh,
right? And
oh,
so we spent a lot of time with each other.
yes, Pastor
We
Jason.
spent
Yes.
time learning each other, and praying for each other and laboring with each other. These are things that you can't get out of a textbook. These are things
Correct.
that you have to have hands-on experience with. Would you remember when we used to do the 10-day fast, and the
Mhm.
leaders would come down and wash feet?
Mhm. Mhm.
Those type of events are rare today,
Yes.
because we've kind of figured it's not sophisticated enough for our high IQs now, right?
Mhm.
So
Mhm. Mhm.
that looks subservient, which is what the gospel
That
calls for.
calls for submission,
Calls
right?
for
Especially
submission, right?
especially the leaders, right? To
Yes,
be able to
yes,
submit, to humble themselves
right.
to one another. I believe we learned, Pastor Jason, you know, and I love how you said it. It taught us that God was important,
Hmm.
number one,
Hmm.
and being together
Yes,
was important. And I think that is so missing
yes,
today,
no question.
that being together, that development of our brothers and sisters, that relationship building,
Yes,
right?
yes.
And I know that relationships are important to our emerging leaders. It just looks a little different,
It
but I think
does.
there needs to be an intentional effort toward understanding when leading in the Lord's church, you've got to be in relationship with the people you are
Yes.
called to steward, right?
Absolutely.
And that
Absolutely.
doesn't always happen. It cannot just happen 90 minutes on a Sunday,
Sure.
right?
Absolutely.
It
It doesn't
can't.
work. It doesn't work. And as I ponder it more, what I think has happened over time is you and I often have this discussion about how leaders should regard and entreat the people of God as we serve them. And then the other side of that street is how leaders submit to the leaders who they fall under in
Yeah.
service,
Mhm,
right?
mhm,
So in other
mhm.
words, your pastors, your bishops, whatever the titles may be, is not really the issue, but their service and the position that they hold in the kingdom. We've got to learn. We got to get back to a place where we learn how to respect that.
Oh,
You
let's
know,
talk about
I
it.
think
Unpack that a little bit, Pastor Jason.
that's kind of gotten lost. In the same vein that leaders have kind of taken advantage of their respective positions in the church, in some regard, we have caused people to not regard these institutions or positions of service at their proper level, right? So I don't
Sure.
mean that the preacher got to have a big chair or parking
Mhm.
space. That's not what I'm talking about.
Right,
I'm just
right.
talking about your even in your approach to them, how you view them, how
Sure,
you serve with them, how
sure,
you handle disagreements with them,
sure,
how you go about handling directives that are given to you
sure.
by your pastor, or just in how you entreat him when you greet him. It's
Mhm.
not your boy.
Right.
You know what I
It's
mean?
not not my homie.
No, it's not your homie. That's not your boy. That's not your. You may be good friends. You may even be relatives in some regards. But no, I think the honor has been misplaced, or the value on the honor that should be there has been devalued, and it's kind of devolved us to a place where we already know how the world feels about the church. They think we crooks. They think we take
Mhm,
all the money. They think we
mhm,
sleeping with all the women and the men in the choir. All of the stereotypical jargon that we hear consistently about the church. That's fine on the outside. I'm not really concerned with what outsiders think because they're not in
mhm.
the house.
Sure,
But when you
sure.
come into the house, what I think has to happen is there has to be a transfer of spiritual principle that lets a generation emerging know this is how you confer honor on one another.
Yes.
This
Yeah.
is how you pay tribute to those whose shoulders you stand on in the gospel, right? The same way we revere the saints in the scriptures, Paul, Peter, John, we speak about them with a reverence because they're in scripture, right? And we
Mhm,
understand the biblical text. And so we
mhm,
honor that.
mhm.
Yet we have men and women right in front of us who've lived before us who we don't show the proper honor to. So, Elder, you can't come into a meeting and call your pastor by his name.
Listen, no, we can't do that. We cannot you and I
Right.
you and I
Right.
cannot do
No, we
that,
can't do
right?
that.
We can't do that. We were not taught that.
No.
However, it has been our experience in observing where that seems to be commonplace,
Yes. More
right?
and more.
I'll share this quick story about how my my experience, our pastor started out as my friend.
Right.
And when that transition happened, in terms of recognizing the pastoral responsibility to shepherd and care for my soul and care for my family, I needed to reconcile in myself how I addressed him with honor.
Absolutely.
I will not,
Absolutely.
I will not, and we're not on first name basis.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Because
Right.
there's a level of respect for the office of the pastor,
Correct.
right?
Correct.
And I think a lot of times it goes to how we handle the man of God, how we
Yes.
handle the woman of God. And I think it's
Yes.
important. Emerging leaders, please listen in and hear what we're saying. There is a a respect and an honor that is due
Hmm.
to the leader that God is calling to shepherd and steward for your soul. And I think that we've got to honor them. And we're not saying put individuals on pedestals, because we're
Yeah,
all
no,
human.
right,
You know what
right,
I'm saying?
right.
But I believe that the Lord does require us to be mindful how we handle
Absolutely.
our leaders in the Lord's church, that they serve. They have specifically our pastors have a role that they need to play in our lives, and we need to honor and respect that, because when there's that familiarity,
Hmm.
right, we may not be able to discern
Hmm.
what it is in terms of correction
Hmm.
and those things. We're looking at that individual as a peer,
Right. And
and
that,
not
yep.
listening to that person as this person is really looking out for my soul. So when they
Yes.
come to me with correction,
Sure.
I'm not rising up in my flesh.
Sure.
You understand what
Absolutely.
I'm saying? I'm
Yes.
prayerfully submitting. Yes, sir, I understand, because there's something that the Lord wants you to know, wants me to know, coming through you. So I think you hit the nail on the head right with that one right there.
Hmm. Hmm.
It's extremely important. And when we talk about submission, we've talked about honor, we've talked about respect, this idea of obedience. And I think you
Oh
mentioned
yeah.
when our pastors or our leaders give us directives,
Oh yeah.
sometimes emerging leaders will feel like, well, that don't make sense.
Yeah. Sometimes older leaders. Sometimes leaders who've been in position for quite a while
This is true.
don't see the
Yeah,
value in that
yes,
sometimes.
absolutely. Yeah. So let me correct myself. It's not just something that is specific to those who are just coming into a leadership role, but anybody, in terms of taking correction or listening to what the man of God or woman of God, depending
Hmm.
on your church dynamic, what they
Hmm.
bring to you. We as servant leaders
Right.
have a responsibility to be obedient.
Right. Absolutely. You know, that term servant leader is so important.
Mhm.
And I think now that we've been using it for quite a while, we've kind of gotten familiar with it, but still can take it for granted. That
Sure.
servant leader is just, in fact, actually what it says. You're a servant first, and because you learn how to serve, you can lead, right? And it's not a leader, period, all by itself. It's just
Correct.
it's service before leadership.
Ah,
Um,
that's good.
and
That's
I
good.
and I
Service before leadership.
Yeah,
Yes.
and I
Yes.
think that particular issue is one of the things that trips us up in the body of Christ now, is that we are putting people in so-called positions without a track record of service,
Ooh.
right?
Mhm.
You haven't served in smaller areas or without a title, but because you may have credentials or you may have some kind of degree, or even if it's not about the degree or credentials, you just want leadership because of what it looks like, in the limelight.
Mhm.
But you don't see, as Pastor George would say, in the kitchen. You haven't been back in the kitchen
Mhm.
to see how this stuff is cooked up, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
You just come out into a beautiful dining set and you see this food smells good, the ambiance, it looks good, but behind the curtain there's a whole mess. There's a whole mess of processes and other things that have to happen to get the people who come out and serving properly.
Yes.
And so I think, once again, that's the wisdom of the elders.
Yes, that's
You
it.
you could never walk into a church back in the 60s, 70s, even I dare I say 80s, early 80s, and say, "Hey, I'm going to be a preacher." No, sir. No,
Sir,
sir. No, ma'am. You would sit for a good while,
a good while.
and the saints would have their eye on you, and the leadership would be clocking you to make sure to see whether your character was or is what you said it is. They would see how faithful you were. They would see how committed you were. My goodness, the church we grew up in, you had to come and give account of the services you made. You
Listen,
had to report on all when you
report on
came to group
all.
meeting,
Come
right?
on, group meeting. How about
Yeah,
that?
you want to lead? Have we seen you? When was the last time we've seen you at service? When was the
Mhm.
last time we saw you serving at the door on the usher board? When service. When
Yes.
have we
That's
seen
it.
you
Yes.
serve? Right?
Yes.
And today, I think now if you play your cards right, you can walk into a small church or a church that really doesn't have any structure, and you can be charismatic and you can throw some words around and you can sing a little bit and you may be able to hoop, or you may be able to dress well and look the part, right? And get right into a leadership position because the church may be needy,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
for
yeah.
looking for people to serve and may not know
Mhm,
how to necessarily know how to identify real servants.
mhm,
But I say all of that to say honor really does play a huge part in how we serve, right? You can
mhm.
serve, but do you serve honorably? When
Yes.
you disagree with your pastor, do you form a small committee on the side that disagrees with him as well and kind of, do this consortium of disgruntled people who don't like pastor's last message? And so you
Mhm,
make a little faction over here. Uh, People who think that they know more than the pastor because he doesn't have degrees, and, all
mhm.
that kind of thing. We've got to learn how to build the house through wisdom and by understanding establish it, because
Yeah.
we can build it right, but if it's not established, it means it won't last.
Oh, that's good.
And the only way you get it to last is that you have to understand what ingredients went into the wisdom of building that house, right? And so all the ingredients that it takes, the wood, the lumber, the cement, the
Mhm,
tools, the
mhm,
nails,
mhm,
the
mhm.
necessary, measuring twice and cutting once. It's all of those type of things that when you build something, you can build it and it can look really good and it can stand for a while, but if it's not built by understanding, then it's not established, which means it has a high propensity to fail when strong winds and storms come. So foundation, honor has to be mixed into that foundation. If you don't know how to honor the man and woman of God, even if you're smarter than them, even if you know more than them, even if you've been serving longer than them, you still have to humble yourself, right? And I think that is a key component to understanding leadership in this 21st century, especially in the church, because people already are looking at us with the side
Yeah,
eye.
yeah. I think that as you it's just so good, so rich. I just really hope the listeners kind of just leaned into everything you just shared, because it's so true. And, we want to make sure that we represent the Lord and the Lord's church
Yes,
in the beautiful way that I believe the Lord requires of us. That it's
absolutely.
about love, it's about community, it's about service
Yes, it
to
is.
one another. And
It is.
I want to before we wrap up, I want to make sure that we kind of bring together some things that you really said in terms of the saints. I
Mhm.
don't even hear that term.
Nah, you don't hear that no
I don't
more.
even hear the term anymore, the saints. But
Saints.
the things that the saints taught us, Pastor Jason, and I want our emerging leaders and all leaders kind of to lean in, was one about character. You
Yes,
said, even before seeking a leadership position, you needed to make sure that your character was in place, right?
yes,
Making sure that you were in a position for somebody to be able to see you. You just
yes,
can't, want to serve kind of like and not be in a position for people to have eyes on you, because
absolutely.
when we see you, there's that opportunity to build trust,
Sure,
right? To make sure
absolutely.
we kind of know what you're doing, your faithfulness, to be able to be consistent, not just because there are people who are faithful, in terms of being present and visible, but being consistent
My God,
in
yes,
your service and being able to humble yourself when necessary, and honoring the man or woman of God with whatever the direction is. So we're gonna put a lot of nuggets in the show notes, because
my
this was
goodness.
such a great conversation.
Mhm.
And I pray that as those who are listening, as you're digesting this information as to what it is you take back to your local ministries, your local assemblies, to please, as you're developing and teaching your leaders, not to overlook the importance of laying that foundational groundwork about character, about
mm,
not just having competency, but cooperation, being able to
mhm,
work with one another, being
mhm.
able to work with other leaders, collaborating. Those
That's
are the
right.
things that, when it comes to service and serving in the local church, honoring the man and woman of God, those are the things that pastors and church leaders are looking for.
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, you and I have had the unique experience of being shepherded by our current pastor
Hmm.
before he was pastoring.
Yes,
You know,
correct.
as
Hmm.
young teenagers, you and I were taken under his wing, and he really groomed us and walked with us in our early days of our spiritual walk. And most people don't know this. I guess a personal fact about me, unless you're in our congregation, you don't know that Pastor George is actually my brother-in-law, right? So
Correct.
he's
Hmm.
married to my
Hmm.
oldest sister, First Lady Charlene. What most people don't get to see are instances such as last night when he's at the house for Thanksgiving.
Hmm.
We're sitting around talking, watching the football game, um, and all day long, I'm while we're doing that, I'm calling him George all day long, you know.
Hmm. Hmm.
But then crosses my heart a spiritual matter.
Hmm.
I have to instantly shift gears when I'm coming from just us chilling
Hmm.
to talking about spiritual matters. He instantly is referred to as my pastor.
Yes.
So in the middle of a sentence, we could be talking about football and something crossed my mind about brother so and so at the church. You're going to hear me go from George 1 second to pastor.
Hmm.
What do you think about this?
Hmm.
And I have learned over time that that's not a small thing, because our pastor is not one who would ever even tell you that he was a pastor unless you
Sure,
asked.
absolutely.
You would never,
Absolutely.
you wouldn't know it, right? He's just that down to earth. But I've made it part of my character to make sure that I always infer that honor on him.
Sure.
And I've taught my sons and daughter that. You know, he's Uncle George if we're at the house kicking it. But the minute you start talking about a spiritual matter or anything regarding the Lord's church, you have to know how to presently, cognitively make that switch.
Hmm.
You've now entered into different space. You're
Yeah.
now talking to your pastor, not your uncle.
Oh, that's good. That's good. I hope all leaders
Yeah.
leaned into that wisdom there, Pastor Jay. So good. So good. Listen, I want to pivot to a segment real fast. It's so good, so good. But I want people to kind of get to know Pastor Jason a little bit better.
Mm, okay.
And so I want to do a segment called Think Fast, real quick.
Okay.
Just a few questions. Don't overthink these.
Okay.
Okay. Just the first thing that comes to your mind. All
Okay.
right. Here
Okay.
we go. So, what's something fun or exciting happening for you personally right now? Fun or exciting?
My grandson.
Oh,
I'm
yes.
sorry. My grandson Kyrie. Yeah,
Yes.
he'll be 3 on Christmas Day in a couple of
Okay.
weeks, and that's just that's it's all about him.
Listen, so what's so funny is that we talked earlier about where the mothers of the church, the older folks, how we in our 40s, and here you are
Yeah,
talking about your grandson in your 40s.
47. Yes. Yes.
I love it. I love it.
Yes.
I love it. Okay, favorite season of the year and why?
Fall. Fall
Mhm.
because it's the changeover. My birthday is in September.
Mhm.
I just love the changeover in the weather and the whole season. It
Yeah.
just brings so many good memories to me.
Okay, good. Good, good. What's your favorite pastime and why?
Favorite pastime is probably playing the saxophone.
Okay.
That's just it's part of my ministry too, but it's something
Mhm.
I just enjoy to do.
So Pastor Jason, listeners, is an anointed musician as well. He can preach, he can teach, and he can make that saxophone holler. I'm
Praise
telling
the
you.
Lord.
I'm telling you. Amazing, amazing. What movie would you never get tired of?
Oh my goodness. The movie Heat.
Ooh, tell us why.
Al Pacino and Robert De Niro are a cop in a bank of robbers,
Mhm.
and there's a scene in the movie where I always use it to keep my mind engaged when it comes to ministry. There's a scene where they just robbed a bank. Robert De Niro is coming out of the bank with all the money with him and his guys who just robbed it. Al Pacino is coming to try to apprehend these guys. They get into a huge shootout in the middle of the street, broad daylight, and there are thousands of cops all over the place. And Robert De Niro and his team Rather than running away from the cops, engage them and start moving toward them.
Mm.
And most bank robbers are in a rush to try and get away. They say, no, we're going to bring the heat to the cops. We're bringing it to them. So we're not
Mhm.
running from them. So I love the fact that they are moving towards the opposition, not running away from it, even though they're outnumbered.
Oh, that's
That's how
good.
I feel about ministry at times. I just feel like everything is so much against us for following Christ.
Hmm.
But I'm never one I'm not running. Like, I'm bringing this to your doorstep. And if you take me out while I'm doing it, then so be it. But I'm not running.
Ah, that's good. That's good, Pastor Jay. Last question. Who is your inspiration?
Wow. There are many. Historically, Malcolm X.
Hmm.
Present day, my father.
Mm. Let's talk about that. Why is your dad your inspiration?
My dad is my inspiration because of his level of ability to sacrifice, commit, and make no excuses.
Mm.
He worked two jobs my whole life. My mother never worked. He had seven children. We never wanted for anything. He worked two jobs and he was a deacon on his post every time he was supposed to be there, handled the needs of the church. And then he was well, I hate to say elevated in this sense of elevation, but he took a step towards being an elder. He was accepted as an elder. He served faithfully as an elder, and then he became a pastor. All while never abandoning any of his duties at home.
Mm-hmm.
He really laid out the platform to be able for me to be able to see you can take care of your family, you can serve the people of God, and you don't and there are no real excuses as to why you can't do it.
That's good. That's good. That's good wisdom right there. So, um, Pastor Jay, you always know it is a pleasure to
Always,
speak
my
with you.
sister.
Always a
Always.
pleasure. So, for those who may want to
Likewise.
connect and engage with you on social media, how can they reach you?
Absolutely. So I'm largely on Facebook, just under my name, Jason Woods. Don't get that confused with Jason Woods Jr., who is my son.
Mhm.
He also is on there. Check him out too, though. He's a pretty cool guy.
He's a cool guy.
Um, and Jazz for Life on IG. That's JAZZ, the word for FORLYFE.
Okay.
Jazz for Life.
Okay, we'll be sure to post those handles into the show notes. As we wrap up our time together, you know that I believe leaders are learners.
Yes,
Yes.
absolutely.
So can you share with our audience what you're currently reading?
I am reading T.D. Jakes' Reposition Yourself. At
Excellent book.
And I'm reading a new book, a brand new book called Battle Cry by Brother Jason Wilson, who is a extraordinary emerging men's ministry leader. He's been
Okay.
around for a while, but I feel like his season is really taking off. He has a great book called Battle Cry that I'm reading right now.
Okay, excellent. We'll be sure to post links to those resources in the show notes as well. Final question, Pastor Jason, and here it is. How can the community of kingdom leaders listening today pray for you?
Oh wow, great question. Pray for me that I continue to serve the Lord's church in a capacity of love and concern for their general well-being. I am one that is kind of I'm 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 results driven on one
Mhm,
end,
mhm,
but I understand that sometimes people take precedence over process,
mhm,
right? And I always try to walk that balance between the head and the heart.
mhm,
Sometimes I'll lean too far into my head knowledge, and I'll abandon my heart. And sometimes my heart gets so soft that I just feel like people are just like acting up because they know they can get away with stuff.
mhm.
Um, but I want to serve my local church in the best of the ability God has given me, and I want to do so effectively. But I also want to know when it's time for me to do the bigger, broader things that God wants me to do that may not necessarily result in my local church service. if that makes sense.
It does. It does.
Yeah,
It does. Excellent.
yeah.
Well, Pastor Jason, thank you so much. God bless you, sir. It's always a pleasure.
Always, my
And
sister.
I am so grateful for your time today. Thank
Praise
you.
God. I had a great time.
Thank you so much for listening and for coming along with me as we explore what it means to operate in the spirit of kingdom excellence. If you enjoyed what you've heard, and it is my prayer that you did, do me a favor, tell other kingdom leaders you know about this space and encourage them to subscribe and follow wherever you're listening. It's been my privilege to share a few minutes of your day talking about what it means to operate in the spirit of kingdom excellence. Be sure to check the show notes from today's episode for ways to stay connected with me. And remember, if excellence is important to God, it should be important to you. Until next time, may God bless you.